Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Universe Podcast, or as today might be called, the second or third or fifth episode of the Claudia Gray Appreciation Society. Yes, I am back with Riki Hayashi, and we're talking about another one of Claudia Gray's awesome novels, this time Master and Apprentice. A novel that goes into the history of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and their early days with Obi-Wan as an apprentice. A book that goes even further back and shows us Qui-Gon and Dooku when Qui-Gon was a Padawan, and tells us more about prophecy and how Qui-Gon got so into prophecy. A book that talks about how according to some Jedi at least, it is official canon that you cannot fall in love, but you can be an F-boy, as one Jedi explains to us. This is a great novel that really fills in so much more of the Star Wars world. So Riki, so glad you're here with us. Say hello, and how you feeling about this book?
Yes, Claudia Gray does it again. Although this is probably my least favorite out of the three I've read so far. But I think it's a really good book, and I think you mentioned that she has a fourth one, so I'm gonna have to go out and find that and see if I continue to enjoy her works. And like I said previously, I'm down, to read some of her non-Star Wars novels after this experience. I think she's just a really good writer in general.
Yeah, and just for those listening at home, what are the other books that she's written?
So you and I have covered Star Wars Bloodline, and then, Lost Stars, right?
Yep.
And then the fourth one is Leia, Princess of Alderaan.
Yep, which I think I did cover with someone else.
Oh, okay.
Certainly I've talked about it a good deal. It's another wonderful book. And yeah, I think I really enjoyed this book because, first of all, I just think her writing is great. There's some other books that you and I have talked about where we really appreciate the details of the universe it spells out or some character moments, but the writing style isn't the best. I think Claudia just does a great job of writing. I think the point of view character shifts a lot, and it's really interesting to see that. And it's just some of my favorite parts of the Star Wars universe we're getting to see explored, because we're getting to dive deeper into this question of how do the Jedi raise Padawans, and how does it prepare or not prepare them for the things they will face. We get to learn more about Qui-Gon, we get to learn more about Obi-Wan, and we get to learn about sort of some of the other Jedis that they're out there with.
Yeah, for me, I've read a lot of Star Wars novels, not as many as like Jonah Kellman, but too many of them, in my opinion, are action-driven because the characters are very familiar, especially the Legends novels when they center on like Luke, Leia, Han, etc.
Yep.
There's not much you can add to those characters. So they end up being like those characters going on adventures, and maybe you get a few new characters mixed in, like your Talon Cards, Mara Jades, etc., and you get to learn about them. But even with familiar characters, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, Claudia has done such a great job of characterizing them and to establish who they become, because this takes place some number of years before the Phantom Menace. So it's setting up who they're going to be by the time we see them in the movies.
Yeah. Obi-Wan, I believe, is 14 in the main part of this story, or 15.
Yeah, teenager of some age.
Yeah. And I'm going to give a plot summary in just a second. So for those who either haven't read the book or haven't read it in a while, don't worry. We're just going to talk a bit more about the kind of book in general. For me, it felt like part of what I think worked and made it such a character-driven story is that the plot itself isn't some big, this isn't a moment where the Republic almost fell. This feels like, in my imagination, if we had a TV show about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, going on Jedi adventures, this feels kind of like an episode of the week, a story of the week, except for maybe this would be the pivotal episode at the end of season 1, where every episode they go to some new planet and they have some new adventure where the Jedi are needed, but mostly it's about the developing relationship between the two of them. And in this one, the relationship between the two of them has kind of come to a head, and they're at a major decision point. And so by the end of this episode, we've kind of wrapped up season 1 and we're ready for season 2. Does that kind of make sense to you? Of like, it feels like it's a kind of story of the week in terms of the stakes that are happening, but for their relationship and their characters, some major developments happening here.
Well, I would watch that show. We could call it Tales of the Jedi, perhaps.
Yeah.
No, but I think I agree with you. Like, that's the feel this has. Tales of the Jedi is an animated show that follows Ahsoka and Dooku kind of like going back and forth and showing, the prequel movies, like how they get to where they are, or the Clone Wars cartoon, I guess, in the case of Ahsoka. And we do see a little bit of Qui-Gon in that one as well. So for me, after seeing Tales of the Jedi, it was interesting to fit the pieces together, because I'm someone who I did not read very many of the prequel era novels. So I know there's a lot of backstory about Dooku. I think you covered, what is it called? Dooku Fallen Jedi or Jedi Lost or something like that. The audio novel. And so I've been getting a lot of information about Dooku that I did not previously have.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is great because we get to see more of Dooku as a Jedi Master and as he trains his Padawan, Qui-Gon. So let me give kind of a quick plot summary. As I said, the main part of the book is about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And they're at this kind of difficult point in their time together where they're feeling like they're constantly at odds with each other. And they're both frustrated by the relationship. Obi-Wan is very much a by-the-book, rules, the Jedi Council says to do it this way. And Qui-Gon is really kind of a bit of a maverick. He's off on his own. He's doing his own thing. He's very, like, to me, Captain Kirk and Qui-Gon would get along very well, in that Qui-Gon will often be like, well, here's the spirit of what the Jedi intended, but we're going to play it a little fast and loose to honor the spirit and maybe play a little fast and loose with the letter of the law. But they're frustrated. They're not really connecting with each other. Qui-Gon is into more of like the living force and the spiritual side and the prophecies, and Obi-Wan doesn't really feel that. And so they're sent together on this mission to a planet called Pijal, where one of their colleagues, another Jedi called Ral, he had this very difficult experience a long time ago where the Padawan who he was with kind of got mind controlled and he had to kill her. And it's a very difficult situation. He probably made some real mistakes that let that happen. He's been sent off to help on this other planet where a young princess was supposed to rule, but she was too young. He's basically been the regent, and he's been raising her kind of as a daughter while also trying to guide this planet towards a new day. And what they're supposed to be guiding it to is a shift from absolute to constitutional monarchy. And Qui-Gon and meanwhile, though, this group called the Opposition is trying to kill the Princess Fanry. So Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are sent to be the official representatives of the Republic at this new treaty signing, which will move it from an absolute to a constitutional monarchy, and also to help keep the princess safe, and also just kind of check in on Rael. They find that things have been going well in some ways, but there's a lot of problems. This corporation called Zerka, Czerka, I believe, Czerka, however you pronounce it, is pretty shady. They practice institutionalized slavery, which is theoretically illegal in the Republic, but it's kind of almost like the Dred Scott decision in our own country, where Southerners were allowed to bring slaves into Northern territory and they couldn't be freed. I'm getting the details of the Dred Scott decision wrong, but the point being that, like, the courts in the Republic are not very good at it. If Republic people are around slave-owning people from outside the Republic, they have to honor it. So slavery is still established, and we learn more and more that the Opposition, which is actually more of a performing arts troupe, which has done a couple of things, they're being branded as terrorists, but really it's some other group that is doing the violence. They just want to make people aware of that there's this huge problem with this company called Czerka, and the treaty is going to be bad, and they want people aware of it. They want people aware of slavery, of the corporate oppression, all these problems going on. Our heroes get caught up in all of this. Rael, the Jedi I mentioned, he is the F-boy I mentioned. He specifically gives a speech to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon where he says there's a direct quote, nothing wrong with getting laid as a Jedi, you just can't fall in love. We'll go into more of the details of that in a bit. But he clearly it becomes pretty clear he is so focused on protecting the princess that he doesn't want to see any of the other details. He doesn't want to know about the treaty. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are kind of caught in the middle. They get involved with some others who are trying to, jewel thieves who are trying to help out. What it all builds to is that Qui-Gon has these dreams about a terrible thing is going to happen at the treaty signing. He didn't want to go along with it anyway, but decides especially not to go along with it because of the dreams he's had. Obi-Wan kind of goes behind Qui-Gon's back, but in that kind of like, my superior is disobeying, I should go to their superior kind of a way. The Jedi say no, go ahead with the treaty signing, and at the treaty signing, instead of it turning out that there's an attack on Princess Fonry, it turns out she's been behind this Blackguard thing all along, because she actually is completely convinced that this corporation is terrible and wrong, and so she wants to hold on to absolute power, throw out the corporation entirely, and do vengeance on them and kill all their people. Our heroes intervene, thinking that she's wrong, and so she has to be stopped. And it turns out she's just kind of like lost in her power. She has to be stopped. But in the end, she's basically proven right. The company is thrown off. A constitutional government is set up. And our heroes ride off into the sunset with Qui-Gon and Anakin, with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan having decided that they should be buddies and Padawan and Master after all. Huge plot summary. It's mostly about characters. So I think the character development is really what matters a lot most. But did I get most of like the plot details right?
Yes, but I think the big thing that you didn't mention is that at the beginning of the novel, the Jedi Council offers Qui-Gon a seat on the council,
big part.
And he has a decision to make, primarily because if he accepts a seat on the council, he can no longer have a Padawan. Mm-hmm. And so, spoilers, obviously, by Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan is still his Padawan, so he declines the seat on the council at the end of the novel after going through this adventure and kind of working things out with Obi-Wan. Part of the reason he's initially thinking about doing it is because he has a very troubled relationship with Obi-Wan, and they're not getting along. They're not in sync. In an opening battle, they just literally were not in sync on how to communicate and fight together. And so this adventure is as much about them talking to each other and learning each other's tendencies and understanding each other and reaching a reconciliation where they can work together. And that is one of the reasons that Qui-Gon eventually rejects the offer to join the council.
Agreed. I'm really glad you brought that up, especially because a very important plot point is that Qui-Gon doesn't tell Obi-Wan this at first. Instead, Obi-Wan finds out. And so Obi-Wan, I think with some justification and also with some, you're a 15-year-old and you take everything very personally, believes that this is Qui-Gon abandoning him and that Qui-Gon didn't even have the decency to tell him. And there's just, the communication between them is really bad. And at times, there are times where it's kind of like those moments when you want to yell at the TV, like just talk to each other instead of both of you feeling all these feelings. It's kind of the perfect lead-in to one of the things I think this book really highlights, which I want to get your feelings on, which is that I know right now in fandom, there's a lot of these debates about like, you know, did the Jedi fail Anakin and did the Jedi fail in general? And there's a lot of people who want to defend Anakin as though he did absolutely nothing wrong and it's all the Jedi's fault. And I think that's ridiculous. And I personally just think that because of that, there's a lot of people who want to go all the other way and say, no, the Jedi were great. It's not their fault that Anakin rejected their teachings. And I've now read a number of books, and there was one we recently read about Inquisitor, The Rise of the Red Blade, that kind of goes somewhat into this. But even with this one, I think that we're finding more and more evidence that the master-apprentice system and the there is no emotion, repress your feelings, it just, there was a lot of problems in this system, and there's a lot, because there's certainly a lot of times that I'm looking at this, and I don't blame Qui-Gon himself necessarily, though I think he screws up a bunch, and I'm just thinking, like, this is not a healthy way to raise children.
No, it's not. And that's one of the other things this novel sets up, is that the character Rael Averross, and because this is a novel, we have no idea how to pronounce some of these names, so we might say them differently, like Rael, Rael. But the Jedi Regent, they say that he was brought into the Order at the age of 5, I believe, and that was considered late, like too old. and that explains like why he is a bit rebellious and out of sync with the Jedi Order. And of course, Anakin, I believe, in Phantom Menace is 10-ish.
Yeah.
So even much older. And they raised that concern in that movie. But this sets up like even 5 is too old they consider too old for the Jedi indoctrination, I'm going to call it.
I actually have the exact quote pulled up. I'm so glad you brought it up. And this is, it's from, I believe it's Qui-Gon's perspective. Perhaps a Jedi Knight with a more conventional background wouldn't have been excused so easily. But Raoul was an extreme latecomer to the temple, fully 5 years old before he was identified on Ringo Vinda, the oldest youngling ever brought in as far as Qui-Gon knew. Those years made a profound difference. Raoul had never fully mastered the subconscious controls that were trained into most Jedi from infancy. The members of the Avaros family were people he missed terribly. The large majority of Jedi didn't know their birth families at all. The exceptions went no further than speaking, on rare occasions, to relatives who were little more than strangers. Rael's manners were rough, those of the orbital station rat he'd been rather than the Jedi he hoped to become. He never lost his Ringo Vindian accent. And I just love that detail, because I think you're right. It's really speaking to how the system of let go of all attachments really works if you never form attachments. You're too old, you're too young to remember how to.
If you're too young to remember, I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi himself was like, I think I had a brother, right?
Yeah.
And so like they try to get these children before they can remember who their family was, and that just sounds terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. And especially with, as we've been kind of balancing, like in later stories, like look at who are all the great Jedi. Luke, Cal Kestis, Kanan, Ezra, like these are all people who are much older and formed attachments, you know, in healthier ways. But yeah, so they're just so much about the number of times where they're just, and this I think have come up in a number of other things that I've read recently about masters and Padawans, the degree to which they're trying to read each other, but they're not saying it directly. And there's a moment where one of the reasons why Obi-Wan has felt so estranged is that Qui-Gon isn't teaching him more about how to fight. He's only giving him the basic forms. And he keeps wondering about this and feeling like, does this mean his master judges him, or his master thinks he's not a good lightsaber fighter, or what is it? And finally, Qui-Gon breaks down and says, no, this is why I did it. And he says it in this very kind of apologetic way. And Obi-Wan says, the text is, Obi-Wan remained quiet for so long that Qui-Gon wondered if he were too angry to really hear any of what he'd said. But finally his Padawan nodded. Thank you, Qui-Gon. I appreciate that, but what? You could have said so. Obi-Wan replied, and then he left. And to me, that quote is just such a perfect illustration of like the breakdown of communication that happens here.
Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful setup for the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm not well versed enough in the lightsaber dueling methods to know all the names, but I do know that Obi-Wan favors a very basic defensive style of fighting. And he's considered like one of the masters of that by the time of the movies. And it's one of the reasons that he's able to defeat Maul, multiple times. Because he's so good at this defensive style. And I love that this novel sets that up of like why he's so good at it. Because kind of Qui-Gon has held him back from the other styles, right? But he's helped him to master this basic so well. Yeah.
And I think also, therefore, to know the different forms, because, there's a great YouTube that goes around that really breaks down the last fight he has with with Maul, where it talks about how, like, he goes through 3 different styles in the lead up to that. With the lightsabers, but also so much of it, I feel like this gives me such a better picture of who Obi-Wan is and why, in terms of how he comes to have, like, he's really a by-the-book kind of a Jedi. We also, in a moment that made me think of you, you often refer to him as the Steve Irwin of the Jedi universe. We get to find the first moment that Obi-Wan connects with an animal. I'm guessing you love that moment?
Yeah. It just keeps happening, and I don't know if the people who write stuff do it intentionally or it's just an accident or what, but because it's never acknowledged in the way, say, like Ezra Bridger's connection with animals is acknowledged and developed, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I do love Obi-Wan and his animals.
Yeah, I felt like this wasn't. I felt like they were pretty aware of the Steve Irwin-ness of Obi-Wan in writing this scene and like giving those fans the here's where it all started.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, his kind of by the book nature, but also at the same time his like anti Jedi Council stance, right? Mm-hmm. In The Phantom Menace, he ends up defying the Council at the end and saying, I'm going to train Anakin Skywalker whether you let me or not, because I owe it to Obi-Wan. And this...
To Qui-Gon, you mean?
To Qui-Gon. And this definitely sets up the roots of that connection, not just with his master, but also with the prophecies.
Yeah. And let's get into that, because... it's funny, we were just saying how Qui-Gon recognizes that maybe even Rael is too old to start the training. And so there's a part of you that has to be like, he must have thought that with Anakin. But clearly a big part of it is because, as this book really establishes, Qui-Gon is 100% a believer in the prophecies. How do you feel about how that was all talked about in the book?
Very interesting, especially the connections with Dooku. Like, Dooku is set up as the original kind of like prophecy guy when he was Qui-Gon's master, got him interested in the prophecies. And Dooku like kind of stepped away from that a bit, and when Qui-Gon got really interested in it, that caused Dooku to kind of get reinvigorated in the prophecies and possibly facilitated his fall to the dark side, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, in this novel, they present 6 prophecies, is what I'm seeing listed. And of course the important one that's mentioned in the regarding Anakin is, where is it? The chosen one. Yeah, chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored.
Right. Yeah. It's and what the story winds up telling us is that it's because of these dreams that wind up coming true that Qui-Gon feels so dedicated to prophecy.
Yeah, Qui-Gon believes he has a Force prophecy dream regarding the coronation ceremony, and takes the actions he does in this novel because of that, in defiance of the Council, even. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the concept of prophecy is an interesting one. And the concept, we've never really learned more about what the prophecy was. I have to say, though, I enjoyed getting to learn more about the backstory and the history of it. And maybe I actually agree more with the book than I think I do. I think... To me, the degree to which Qui-Gon is willing to throw everything else aside because of the prophecy is problematic. It's not heroic. Did you see it as like, okay, good, Qui-Gon's the one who's willing to listen to the Force and listen to the truth, or did you see it as more problematic?
I would say that there's 2 different interpretations here. Mm-hmm. Or 2 different ways to think about it. The first is his personal decision to follow his Force dream is one thing, right? Because he experiences that personally and sees what he does in his dream. And it's left to him to interpret it. And he does, I think, kind of misinterpret it in some ways. And afterwards kind of retcons and says, oh, that's what it meant.
Right.
Versus the written down Jedi prophecies from thousands of years ago, which... the people reading about them, like in the now of this novel, have no idea what the original Force visions were. They're only reading those Jedi's interpretations of it and then trying to glean their own interpretation of that. So, like, we've seen this in the real world with Nostradamus is, like, the most famous case, where people have been like, oh, this, like, obscure Nostradamus thing, that meant, World War II and Hitler, even though, like, the details are different and wrong. You can like kind of force it into place.
Yeah. People do that with the Bible all the time. They do it with all kinds of prophecies and sacred texts and all sorts of things like that.
And so I think it's one thing to say Qui-Gon acting as he did based on his own personal vision is one thing versus like, how do we interpret these prophecies from thousands of years ago is like a completely different thing, because those, like even in our own time, like stuff has been translated and translated again. And we just don't know what the original text said or meant, like for the time, like the word may have been translated correctly, but the concept and how it's used in society could be completely different.
One thing I thought was really interesting is that we have not seen dreams occur very often in Star Wars. And I think there are other examples, but for me, by far the most prominent example of a dream that might be a prophecy in all of Star Wars is in Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin dreams about Padme's death and the death of his children. And I think it is never quite revealed whether, like, Palpatine, like, used Force magic to make him have that dream, or if it was him, you know, dreaming about something and then just prophecy leading him down a very bad path. But, like, the fact that those dreams were so negative in their eventual impact, and it set up a sort of, by trying to stop the thing that you were dreaming about, you caused the thing you were dreaming about. It's very interesting to me that dreams are the kind of plot point that move things forward here.
Yeah, there was that one in Empire Strikes Back. Luke, while he's training, I don't know if you want to call it a dream, but he has a vision about Han and Leia in Cloud City. And then Rey and Kylo, when they are sharing their Force dyadness, they both refer to, like, seeing each other, like, when the time comes, like, you will join me. It's like, no, you will join me. And they're both trying to, like, interpret the situation of, like, who's right. And it's like, they're both right, but again, like, they have interpreted it incorrectly.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really interesting, and it just kind of put a further spin on it. And there's one passage again here that I want to read, because I think this is what Claudia Gray is getting at, but maybe I'm not. But this passage especially made me think Qui-Gon's interest in the... Because one of the things that this passage especially was what led me to think, like, Qui-Gon's interest in the prophecies is not the best idea. And that's one of the things why Dooku is warning Qui-Gon against going too deep into the prophecies, and then Dooku kind of has to be reminded of that as well. The idea is put forth that trying to understand the prophecies is an attempt to control the future in a way that is related to the dark side. If it's an attempt to sort of, instead of just living in the moment. And I thought that was really telling. And then this passage really hit it for me, because Obi-Wan brings that up, and Qui-Gon says, "I'm not turning to the dark side," Qui-Gon snapped. "Not every disagreement with Jedi orthodoxy turns you into a Sith Lord overnight." "I didn't mean that," Obi-Wan sighed. "If you won't listen to me about the visions, will you at least listen to me about our mission? Our mandate on Bajal comes straight from Chancellor Kaj herself, and she was very clear. We're here to protect Princess Fanray and witness the treaty so the hyperspace corridor can be opened. If we have to push for the treaty to be amended and made fair, then that's what we'll do. But you can't refuse to sign on behalf of the Republic. You don't have the authority to make that choice." His apprentice wasn't wrong, but when facts collided with ideals, Qui-Gon preferred to change the facts.
You can't change...
That last sentence is...
You can't change facts, Qui-Gon.
Right?
That's not how facts work. But,
like to me, those are the words of a fundamentalist. That's the, like, I don't want to believe in, whatever scientific thing they're trying to reject, so I'm just going to change the facts.
Yeah. But it reminds me a lot of when people... There's a quote, like, data never lies, but people use data to lie all the time. Exactly. Like, even correct data, like, you can present it in a way that will support your point of view, even if that's not what it's actually doing.
Right.
So yeah, that is a huge problem with prophecy, is A, can you change anything? Or by, the classic time travel thing, by you knowing about the future, are you going to cause it to happen? Type of thing. And then B, like, interpretation. Like, the whole prophecy, right? that's written in this book that we've heard about a lot. A chosen one shall come, born of no father. And I think that it's mentioned that like Shmi doesn't know Anakin's father, or is like impregnated by the Force or something, right? Like is a weird Plagius novelization thing.
Yeah.
And through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored. And I've said on this podcast before, like, why would the Jedi want balance? There are thousands, tens of thousands of Jedi, and to their knowledge, 0 Sith. So to bring balance to the Force, in my interpretation, was for the Sith to ascend and to destroy the Jedi to some degree.
Well, and I think this is one of those times where, again, you can read anything into it, because I think that is a very valid, that Darth Vader did bring balance because he created a situation where there were 2 Sith and 2 Jedi. But then the math got all screwy
more
by
now.
things.
We keep finding out more.
But like another interpretation of it, and I think this again comes from more recent stuff, is this idea that the Jedi are living in balance with the Force, but that the Sith want to control the Force and are thus bringing the Force out of balance. And so that if the world is all Jedi and no Sith or no dark side Force users, then that, so that I think is another interpretation. You could see it either way, but I think eventually, the point exactly is like, we have no idea what it means. And for Qui-Gon to get this obsessed, this focused on it, like to me, in a lot of ways, what this book does is to say both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were somewhat wrong for taking on Anakin the way they did. This book isn't trying to justify it. It's trying to help you understand and explain it.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And there are other prophecies presented.
Yeah, let's hear about some of the other
novel. And they're very interesting. So one of them, she who will be born to darkness will give birth to darkness. And keep in mind, this novel came out, I believe, in 2019. So this is like right in the midst of the post-quels. That would be like after The Last Jedi was released, but before Rise of Skywalker. But Claudia Gray probably was given like a script or like a synopsis of Rise of Skywalker at this point. But this seems like it refers to Leia, right? Born of darkness will give birth to darkness. Darth Vader's daughter giving birth to Kylo Ren. Or it could be pointing at some future thing. Who knows?
Yeah. Or it could be about something that happened 600 years in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it all goes.
The one that plays into this novel is when the Kyber that is not Kyber shines forth, the time of prophecy will be at hand. And in this novel, there's a crystal that kind of registers as Kyber, but it isn't. It's like it's like I can't remember what its actual name is, but they call it like false Kyber as well.
Yeah,
or like fool's Kyber.
Yeah, and they do something really interesting with it, where Fanry and her people are able to basically create shields that the Jedi lightsabers can't penetrate. And it turns out eventually that there is a reason why they can penetrate them, which is why, if you ask why isn't everyone using this later, if it's like Beskar 2.0, it's not, but that's definitely where that prophecy comes from.
I thought it could also potentially be referring, here I go interpreting my own interpretation, that it could be referring to the Death Star, because the Death Star is powered by Kyber crystals, but maybe like the process changes it somehow so that it's quote-unquote not Kyber, but...
Certainly, I mean, we know that the Sith lightsabers are corrupted Kyber crystals, and so possibly it's an extension of the whole thing. I don't know. Let's talk about, as I think is a convenient plot point, but one that I think this uses well, is the idea of like when you have two people who are kind of arguing over how far to go, you introduce a third character who's the example of like going far further. And I think they do that well here by kind of balancing that, yes, Qui-Gon is pretty far outside the lines, but is definitely not quite so far as dear Mr. Rael. What do you think of his character?
I actually didn't like his character very much. And part of it is I didn't really understand not just his character, but like why he was here. Like it really, I guess, went against my understanding of the Jedi of this time and the Jedi Council, that they sent a Jedi to be a regent of a planet or a star system. Like, that seems to me to be outside the bounds of Jedi involvement. Like, they don't have like a full prime directive, but it seems like way too political for them.
I mean, it felt to me like, and again, I mean, the more I talk about this, the more I think Claudia Gray is being quite critical of the Jedi, but in ways that I think are somewhat honored. He has had this horrible experience of losing his Padawan that he is probably to some large degree at fault for. What he needs is a therapist. Like, he needs someone to sit down with and talk through that in a way that he can both not feel like overwhelmed by the guilt and want to destroy himself, but also really come to terms with that guilt and come to terms with what did you do wrong and take accountability of it. And the certain sense I get is that the Jedi don't have the means, they don't have the desire to do that, in part because of this whole, like, don't live in the past, live in the moment. Emotion is, there is no emotion, there's only peace. And it definitely feels like this is a, like, let's just send him to boarding school. Let's put him out of the way and then mostly forget about him. Because I think you're right. I think if the Jedi had been paying attention to what he was doing, and that he was basically ruling instead of just kind of being an executor maybe of other people's plans, it's pretty far afield of what the Jedi, I think, are supposed to be doing, but it fits the idea of the Jedi are just kind of losing control and don't really have an idea of what all the Jedi are out there doing.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, a regent is the power, is the decision maker, in lieu of, in this case, a princess, a child who is not yet of age to rule. So, like, the princess in this case would never make an actual decision. It's up to the regent to make the decision and be teaching the princess and say, these are the things you have to do once you come of age and become the ruler.
And I do think I could see a world in which, because, I mean, the problem with a regent, therefore, is, are they going to want to have power for themselves? I mean, that's the whole point of so many fantasy novels or various points of Game of Thrones or things like that. And so the idea that a Jedi who doesn't want power, who will happily give up power, could sort of play this middleman role, it does make sense. But yeah, I think it's pushing the bounds of what the Jedi are supposed to do enough that I would think there'd be a lot more oversight, a lot more control.
Yeah.
I want to read the passage that in my mind gave Averross F-boy status, because the language struck me as like very not Star Wars, but also is just such an interesting way of looking at this concept that I want to hear your thoughts on it. And this is when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon have quite literally caught Rael Averross in bed with someone. And he says, the writing is, "Damn, but Averross wished he had that ale around now." And then he speaks, quote, "Falling in love, that's what the Jedi code forbids. Getting laid? Not so much. Not if it's casual like me and Selby. That doesn't compromise my emotions, doesn't divide my loyalties, anything like that. I might have broken the letter of the law, but not the spirit. On Felucia, you broke the spirit of the law into a dozen places." And that's referring to another thing that Obi-Wan had done, that Qui-Gon had done at one point.
Do we know what that is? Are we supposed to know?
I'm not sure. It may well be revealed in something, but just kind of sticking with Averross says, yeah, what do you think of this take on, I can sleep around, I just can't fall in love?
Again, I don't like him. I think this is probably one of the reasons I don't like him. I think it makes kind of sense what he's saying, but I'm a romantic at heart, so I'm not into the, as you say, F-boy status.
Yeah. It is very interesting the way he says it, because it's funny, in the world of polyamory and some of that kind of challenging of nothing wrong with monogamy itself, but just of the monogamy as like the only way to love, I think one of the ideas that's put forth is the idea that like casual, like what is referred to as casual sex, like having sex with someone without an ongoing relationship, can still be very emotional. It still can have a lot of intimacy. It still can be about sharing something with the other person, whether it's, a lifelong friendship that falls into bed once or just like a momentary connection, because sex can be really fun. The way he's talking about it, though, it seems it goes to the opposite end of like, he doesn't quite say we're just using each other, but that's pretty much the implication here. And yeah, it's I appreciated them further spelling out that there's this like question of like what's the letter of the law versus what's the spirit of the law, because Like, I know a lot of people will defend, again, the Jedi with Anakin of saying, like, no, he could have been in love with Padme. He just had to do it without attachments. And I don't think that's accurate. I think by the time of Anakin, it's pretty clear he's not supposed to be physically, romantically in love with anyone or have physical, sexual, romantic feelings towards anyone at all. And so hearing them explicitly say, like, yes, it is against the letter of the law, even to have kind of, emotionless, commitmentless sexual encounter with someone. I was like, okay, good. That felt, I didn't love his character, but I appreciated sort of this fills in more pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder where, I guess this has to be before Obi-Wan meets and falls in love with Satine, right? Because he's a little he's a little too young for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be interesting, like that's definitely a Star Wars story I want to see or read.
Yep.
Is that adventure and how they fall in love. Because I think it's so central to Obi-Wan. Say her name, Star Wars, please.
Yeah.
And,
say her name.
And we're talking about Satine Kryze, who's a Mandalorian Duchess, who during the Clone Wars, it's revealed that her and Obi-Wan were in love, are in love, had a relationship, question marks. That's why we need the story.
Yeah.
And I think
she at one point says quite literally, I would have given up the Jedi Order for her.
Yes, yes.
For you, he says, yeah.
And I not only do I want them to tell the story because, again, I'm a romantic, but because it could help fill in, like, these gaps of what is it that the Jedi Order is against and why. Because Obi-Wan, he has these feelings. I don't think he would deny that he has these feelings. But as a Jedi Knight or Jedi Master, he does not let those feelings compromise his decision making. Mm-hmm. And to me, like, that is what you're supposed to do. You can't deny your feelings. They exist. They happen. But you cannot allow your feelings to cloud your judgment. You have to do what is right for the greater good as a Jedi.
Well, and I think that's where this becomes interesting because, and again, this is sort of the, like, it feels to me like the Jedi had at one point an idea of this healthy understanding of the power, but also the danger of romance and sexuality and things like that. And now they've basically moved to abstinence only.
Yeah.
Because, like, we know Kanan and Hera literally have a child, as told in Rebels. So we know that they were sexually active, and certainly they were very romantic towards each other. They were very loving towards each other. And it didn't lead him to the dark side. It did the exact opposite. So, yeah, just another really interesting part of the story there. And let's get into this. Because, again, it feels in some ways like this is like a CSI or Law & Order thing where the main thing is the development of the characters, not the story of the week. But it is a fun story of the week. And to me, the main interesting thing, especially for us, is kind of like people like to talk about ethics and character decisions. What do you think about this whole story of this planet with this big corporate influence and the decision the princess eventually makes?
So the corporation, I'm going to call it Cherka. I don't know, like Cherka. The Cherka Corporation is a terrible company. Like, they engage in slavery, and it sounds like, at least like in their relationship with this planet, very predatory treaty signings, like almost deceptive treaty signings in designed to, like, enslave individuals, but also, like, potentially, like, enslave this entire planet, not necessarily as slaves, but as a state vassal state to them. And my understanding is that this corporation has a long history, in Legends. I don't know how much in canon, but, like, the dates back to, like, old High Republic days. So,
interesting.
It has been around for a long time, and maybe we'll see more of it, like, in canon, because it's got kind of like Wayland Yutani feels to it, from the Alien franchise, of, like, this massive corporation that's just, like, up to no good, but no one can really do anything about it because it's so big.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they would be part of, like, separatist trade federation kind of, we don't want the Republic limiting what we can do kind of things. And so here, I'm going to throw down a bit of a gauntlet, and I'm curious if given conversations we've had in the past, I think we're going to disagree, but I'm curious. I may be wrong here. I am mostly on the, like, Magneto is right. Killmonger had some good points. Princess Fanry was right. And to me, it frustrated me in terms of the writing, because what it felt like was she's the only one who is willing to actually say, no, we can't have this. The Republic, I think they talk about how there's this like hyperspace lane that needs to happen. And so they're willing to kind of turn a blind eye, or like, we'll promise to try and reform things with Circa later. But the assumption is it's never going to happen. Everyone's trying to push them towards this governmental treaty. And she's the one who's saying, like, no, I won't do that. And I'm not going to give up power if it means I can't stop that. And granted, I love a good villain. And I think I'm often a little bit more outside the pale in terms of what people are willing to push for. But there are times when I think something that happens a lot in sort of superhero action sci-fi things is you're presented with a villain who actually makes some really good points that are really challenging the establishment, but they're a little bit too willing to kill, they're a little bit too indiscriminate about who they fight, and so our heroes have to stop them. And like in some of the later X-Men movies, it kind of felt like this way about Magneto, where the writers sort of got 2/3 of the way through and then went, oh wait, but we have to make Magneto a villain, so let's just have him kill people for no good reason. That's kind of how I felt here. I felt like Princess Fanry was completely justified in saying, like, no, this is all terrible. This corporation's horrible. I'm going to use my power to push them out. And I was disappointed that she was so quickly framed as, I want all the power for myself. Anyone who gets in my way, I'm going to kill them too. And thus she became a villain that had to be stopped. What was kind of your take on her storyline and how that all played out?
Yeah, so in the novel, it's set up as a mystery. Like the whole thing with the opposition terrorist group, which ends up being not terrorists, but like a political action, like flash mob group almost. Yeah. They're kind of, yeah. They're comical. It's like comic relief. Like, oh, like you can't be the terrorist. Like you barely have any weapons. And I will be honest, like I was not looking for clues as to who was behind it all, who was behind the curtain, because I didn't really care about it that much. And so when it happened, I was like, oh, okay, it's her. And I guess it surprised me, but I hadn't been looking. And I didn't really care. Yeah, I think it's because of what you said. I don't think she was set up. The Princess Fanry was set up as a strong enough character in the beginning parts of the novel for this, sudden and inevitable betrayal to be interesting. So I probably one of the weaker parts of the book is her character and her relationship with Rael Averross. Because she has this thing where it's like, you never listened to me, like you only wanted me to be like what you saw me as and never asked me my opinion. And I don't like that was a lot of telling, and I don't know that there was enough showing of that throughout. Yeah,
that's fair. I think it's very fair. Between her and Obi-Wan, it did make me wonder if Claudia Gray had like some teenagers in her life with a high degree of petulance, because the petulant teenager trope is very present in both of them.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess they're about the similar age. And maybe, I mean, not that she would listen to this podcast, but that I think that would have been an interesting way to develop her character more, is have her play off of Obi-Wan more. Like, did they interact much? I can't remember now.
They didn't. And I have to say, I think it could have been interesting. I think it would have, and this is unfortunately just the nature of media, is that if you put two teenagers, especially of different genders, together in a work like this, the speculation is always going to be that it's romantic in some way. And so I'm kind of glad we didn't get that. But I think I agree with what you're saying. It felt kind of tacked on. In some ways, I felt like that could have been its own book, is just all the stuff about Rael. And I wonder somewhat also if this was like kind of two books pushed together, or, what happened in production. But I thought it was an interesting story, and I'm glad we're kind of similar on where she's coming from, because especially, and this is again, like, the Killmonger had bad ideas, but at the end of the movie, T'Challa does all the things that T'Challa winds up at least listening to the main critiques that Killmonger was making and doing a lot of things he wanted, even if not the more violent ones. And in the same way, the slavery-loving company is pushed completely off this planet in a way that never would have happened if the princess hadn't done this. So I'm kind of like, well, what she did kind of worked.
Yeah, but here's the difference. Killmonger starts from a position of no power. and he seeks the power. He seeks the throne of Wakanda in order to make the changes he wants to see in the world.
Right.
Princess Fanry had, like, not as, I don't know what it's called when you're under the Regency, but she is set up to become the power, even though at the treaty signing she's supposed to sign a large part of it away. In that moment, she has all the power. She could declare, no, like, I'm not signing this treaty. I'm going to keep the power. We're kicking this corporation out, etc. And presumably her people would go along with that. I don't know. I guess we don't. Yeah, we don't know the political situation of, like, how the people feel about her specifically. But to me, it feels different from Killmonger because she has a much clearer path to the power to make the changes than he does.
That's fair. I guess I felt like she felt like, my impression was that she was kind of getting railroaded, especially because the whole Republic wants this as well. And so I was kind of seeing things in here of this, you know, a country where it has pretty terrible leadership, but the rest of the world wants that leadership because it has oil or, you know, whatever it is like that. But yeah, I think it's a part of the story that could have been a lot better developed, I think. What else? What are the last things you want to talk about from this book that we haven't brought up yet?
I want to continue to talk about the prophecies because there's some ones. Yeah. There's some ones in this. Like I said, this was written and published in between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. And there's a prophecy in this novel that says, when the righteous lose the light, evil once dead shall return. So somehow Palpatine returned. It's right there.
Oh, it's interesting, because to me that was a very clearly about the Jedi have lost their light. The Jedi have fallen. And in the process that was already beginning here, but really is accelerated by the time Palpatine comes to power as Chancellor. And that's what it was referring to. But you're right, it could refer to both.
And there's actually a second one. He who learns to conquer death will, through his greatest student, live again. So that one's a little more ambiguous, but it could also be referring to Palpatine. Who knows?
Yeah, well, that one, remember that this is certainly in the book, but also in the book that is Legends, but in the movie, Palpatine tells Anakin the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and that Darth Plagueis learned to conquer death. So that's what I was thinking that one was referring to.
So he who learns to conquer death is Plagueis, and then will, through his greatest student, live again. So do you think that is referring to Plagueis or Snoke being a Plagueis clone? Because that's been there's been some speculation about that.
Maybe. Could be. I guess I'm kind of anti-prophecy, so I think part of the point is that some of these are supposed to be kind of dumb, but I don't know. I want to find some interviews with Claudia Gray and get a sense of, like, because it may well be that she thinks this book is the, like, no, this is why prophecy is right and why Qui-Gon was right all along. I don't know.
And then the other thing, like, you mentioned it briefly, that the Jewel Thieves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two other characters in this novel, pretty prominent characters, actually, and we haven't really talked about them. Rahara Wick and Pax Marafur is how I'm going to pronounce that. Star Wars. Thanks for these names, Star Wars. And
yeah, they really need pronunciation guides.
These characters were interesting, like especially Pax.
Mm-hmm.
It is said in this novel that he was raised by protocol droids, like up until he was I think a teenager or something, or a preteen. And so he has a very, there was a character in Lost Stars that we kind of read as kind of potentially autistic. And I think Pax is presented in a similar way, that because he was raised by protocol droids, does not have a lot of, the human interaction skills.
Yeah. There were a lot of times where he's talking about how frustrated he is, that he is trying to express an idea, but that someone else hears his idea differently. And that this idea that he should have to account for how someone else might hear his idea while expressing his idea is something that for me as a neurodiverse person, I related to so hard. And I do think it's important to do that. And I now try to do that. But there were so many passages of PAX where I was like, I feel you, brother. I so hard feel you right now.
Sorry, I'm just getting a lot of...
Yeah, I think my internet is just really bad today because it...
Can I turn off?
Okay. If you click the camera, there you go.
That can help. But now I can't see you.
Well, your voice sounds a little clearer to me now.
All right. Let me reset. So we're talking about PAX, right?
Right. And I just talked about how, for me as a neurodivergent person, I really related to him a lot.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that Claudia has written 2 novels now with characters like this, and presenting PAX in this way is, because autism is genetic, right? But in this case, maybe it's being presented as more of a learned behavior. So he might not have autism, but acts like a protocol droid. So to other people, it has a similar effect.
Well, my understanding is that, and again, I'm not a professional here, but that there's still an awful lot about autism we don't know, and that there's a lot of debate, as far as I can tell, about whether there is a sort of biologically caused condition that may well be genetic, but certainly also that people can go through certain environmental issues, or just where they're raised or how they're raised, that will either cause them to also be neurodiverse in some way, or at least have symptoms of that in some way. So yeah, I think it's a very broad question.
Okay, that's fair enough. And again, for a minor character in this novel, right? Like the 5th or 6th most important character. I think it's such an interesting thing to have, to present as part of this character. And that's, again, with her novels, I would read a novel about Pax and Rahara and their adventures as jewel thieves in the underworld in the future, right? So she's done such a great job of taking the characters we know and giving us great backstory about them. But also, like I said, I didn't like Fanry as much, Rail maybe, but these 2, I would read another novel about these 2.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I didn't really talk about them much because they're not really essential to the plot, but they're really essential to the color of the novel and the flavor, the feeling of the novel. And yeah, they're fantastic characters. And because we talked a lot about him, she's an escaped slave, and so that gives her a certain passion. And there's a lot of great stuff about how the 2 of them drive each other crazy, but also balance each other really well in a way that I'm also romantic. And I feel like there's clearly a discussion of them having romantic feelings for each other that I just thought it was all very well done.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the ex-slave thing, because that actually is also a big part of Qui-Gon's journey in this novel, is his stance on slavery and kind of questioning why the Jedi and or the Republic can't or won't do anything to stop it in the galaxy. I think she even asks him that, you're a Jedi, why don't you stop this?
Right. Although again, it sort of is it sets him up at the end that now he's going to be much more anti-slavery. And then, however many years later, he's oh, well, I can't buy your mother out of slavery. Oh, well.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think it is... To me, it's setting up why he's so passionate about freeing Anakin. The combination of he's a slave and the chosen one, right? 2-for-1 deal. And so I think he dislikes slavery, as you should, and goes to great lengths to free him. And we can kind of question why does he not go to similar lengths to free Shmi, especially when you're flying around with the queen of an entire planet who can presumably buy her out, but I don't know. That's for another time.
Yeah. There's a lot of ethical questions I think that raises, but it is nice to see it addressed further.
It at least gives us a better idea of who Qui-Gon Jinn is as a person, especially with regards to slavery, and I think that helps a little.
Yep. Very much so. We had a lot to say about this. Are you okay if we move on to the one piece of feedback we got from our last episode, and then we can wrap up and then go to our members-only section?
Yeah, I think we're good. To sum it up, there's a couple of characters who I was a little lukewarm on, but overall, I enjoyed this novel a lot, and I really enjoyed, I don't know, seeing Qui-Gon Jinn again, reading Qui-Gon Jinn again is something. He's so central to who Anakin becomes, in that very short time. And there's been a lot speculated and written about, what kind of master could he have been to Anakin? Could he have saved / prevented Anakin's fall, right? That kind of thing. So learning more about Qui-Gon is always awesome.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Well, so here's the bit of feedback we got. We've been getting a bunch, and I'm just going to kind of space it out over different things, especially when I have different guests on. And this was about our Glub Shido episode that Riki was on. Both Riki and Sarah Hayashi were on. And it comes from Sylvia. Sylvia writes, "Love the talk about Glub Shidos. I hate the strike, but I'm glad you're doing some of these more outside-of-the-box topics. As a follow-up question, who is a book character you'd love to see on screen? Thanks for the show, Sylvia."
Who is a book character? We've already gotten Thrawn. That had to have been everyone's number one, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of fandom out there who is clamoring for Amara Jade in live action or animation. I'm not really there, mostly because of her relationship with Luke. I don't really want that or need that in my life.
Yeah.
So who else is there out there? I guess Talon Card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a fun one. He's kind of the Han Solo stand-in in those Thrawn books.
Yeah.
Which is funny because Han Solo is also in the books, but he's another smuggler.
Well, he is the stand-in insofar as Han Solo and Lando go respectable, right?
Right.
They became generals. Lando becomes a businessman, a legitimate businessman. I guess he was already on Bespin. But Talon is the guy who is still into smuggling. So he takes over that role of if you need something done, outside of the bounds of the law, give me a call. And he doesn't always join the fight, maybe until the climax. He's always kind of on the fence of I'll help you out here, but I'm not in this for your New Republic. So he's definitely a Han Solo stand-in.
Yeah, I think he'd be a really fun one to see on screen. I think I would really love to see, because I think you're right. With the problem is with some of these characters, they've had such complete character arcs that you sort of wonder how could that translate to on screen? And so I think some of the ones I'd most like to see are ones where we only get part of them in a book. And so I think, honestly, like Pax and the other woman whose name I don't remember would I think be great. I think, some of my favorite books are by E.K. Johnson, the Queen's Shadow books about Padme. They really go into much greater detail about her handmaidens. And one of them, it was played by Keira Knightley for 5 seconds, and she did die on screen in the prequels, but we really got nothing of those characters. So I would really love those. And frankly, I think seeing some other Sith would have been really great too. We're getting to see more of what the Jedi were like, but Darth Bane or Darth Plagueis or even just some other random Sith who we haven't really heard much about. I think it would be fun to see on screen at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking Yendor is someone who I mentioned. Yendor is just sprinkled in to in the background of multiple of these novels. I'm who is this guy, right?
Yeah.
Kip, I think his name was Kip Duros in the second or third trilogy of Legends novels. I think it's Jedi Academy trilogy. Mm-hmm. He is presented as a Force user who falls deep to the dark side. He uses a weapon, I think it's called the Sun Crusher.
Oh dear.
It's the new Death Star, right? But it's not a space station. It's literally one ship, but it can fire like some kind of special torpedo into a star that causes it to supernova.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes around and uses it to destroy like imperial star systems. So he's like doing it, quote unquote, for good, but he's still killing like millions or billions of people.
Yeah.
And he comes back from that. He's doing it because like a Sith ghost is kind of like possessing / tricking him, like through Force Whispers. So he comes back from that at the end of the trilogy. And I don't know that there was any follow-up, but I would have loved to have seen like someone who fell deep, deep into the dark side and committed, mass genocide. Like, how do you deal with someone like that who now is walking the light? And maybe we could see a little bit of that with Reva, right? Mm-hmm. Someone who fell to the dark side and maybe has put it behind her. Like, that's a kind of story that I want to see, whether it's her or like someone like Kip. I would love more of that, because too many of the people who fall to the dark side and then redeem themselves die immediately, right? In these stories.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
Deal with the consequences.
I think that's often what happens in these stories. It's part of why, and I know you and I have both talked about this, that I love Zuko so much in Avatar The Last Airbender, because he doesn't get that easiest, I mean, not that death is easy, but, he doesn't get that, like, I did one good thing and now I'm dead, and so you have to remember me fondly. He has to do the hard work of redemption. So, yeah. Well, great question, Sylvia. Thank you so much. Riki, as always, thank you so much for being on this episode. We're going to have a little bit more for our members in just a moment, but for those who aren't sticking around, Riki, where can people find more of your stuff?
Nowhere. I don't know.
Okay.
Blue Sky? I'm on Blue Sky, but I don't even know what they're called. They're not tweets, but I haven't posted much on there. But I'm squatting, trying to get a feel for that social media, like, website and community. But mostly, like, I've just not been on anywhere right now.
That's fair. It's not the worst thing to be taking a break from all of it, to be honest. So, I am not doing the same. You can find me all over social media under The Ethical Panda or variations thereof. These podcasts are part of the True Story FM family podcast. So if you go there, you will get all the other podcasts that are being made there, but you also find all of our show contact information. That's so you can send in feedback. We love feedback. We love to hear your thoughts. Have you read this book? You haven't read it? What do you think about it? What do you think about what we had to say about it? Would love to hear your thoughts on it. And there you can also find our membership. We are a member-supported podcast. All the content is free. Our base content is always free. It's going to remain so. But we do members get ad-free content. Members get some bonus content, which we put at the episode end of most episodes. And of course, just it's a way to help support the podcast. And right now during the strike, it's a way to help support the strike fund. So please think about becoming a member. All the information's in the show notes or on the podcast homepage. It's $5 a month, $55 for a year. Save a little bit of money that way, and you get to support us. And it really means the world to us and helps us to keep the lights running. So thank you so much on behalf of myself and Riki. We have spoken.